So rockets are the same. The 50 psi of pressure, which is about the same as a car tire, keeps it inflated and keeps it from crumpling. But then those stiffeners also help keep it rigid. Yeah, so believe it or not, a rocket tank is thinner versus its diameter than a Coke can. So when you look at a Coke can, how big it is and then how thin it is, a rocket tank is actually thinner than that. So yeah, it's pretty light. It has to be very light.
Sure. Aerospace companies started using metal 3D printing over a decade ago to construct small, complex parts. For example, the injector.
That is the most important part of any rocket engine, where you're basically going to take the liquid propellant and turn it into a fine mist that mixes really rapidly. And those have actually been transitioned to 3D printing all over the industry.
Traditionally, something like this, it's a rocket engine injector, so it mixes liquid oxygen and liquid methane propellants together, and this is what actually produces all the fire and flame that is in a rocket engine. Traditionally, it would be over 1,000 individual pieces, and it would take 9 months. But here, we're 3D printing the whole thing in one piece. It takes 2 weeks, and it costs 10 times less.
One of the big benefits of 3D printing is reducing the number of parts. Have you ever thought about how inside a rocket's combustion chamber, it gets really hot, up to 3,500 Kelvin? That's hot enough to melt virtually any metal. So how do the combustion chamber and rocket nozzle not melt? Well, the answer is they're cooled by passing the cryogenic propellants over them.
On the space shuttle main engines, I love to talk about them because inside those engines, it's hot enough to boil iron. On the outside, you can freeze stuff to the exterior of this because you're running liquid hydrogen through these things. But to make those, you basically had to take thousands of very small pipes, and then you would form them into the shape of the combustion chamber and the nozzle, and then you would braze weld them together. And this was a ridiculously labor-intensive task. You would have 1,080 individual pipes running up the side, all having to be welded together to make the combustion chamber and the nozzle on the space shuttle engines. So you can actually 3D print these things.
This is a rocket nozzle being 3D printed, and you can see the channels for the cryogenic propellants being printed right into the single part, instead of having to add 1,000 pipes on the outside. Smaller parts like these are typically 3D printed using metal powder and lasers.
So you can see the cooling channels are all being built as the one piece. So this is a nozzle. It really just lays down a layer of powder that's about a 20th the thickness of a human hair. So it's really, really fine layers, just over and over and over and over relentlessly for probably about a week or so, and then out comes a rocket nozzle. All printed as one piece. It's way cheaper than traditional. And this has 4 lasers going at once. That's amazing. I get asked a lot, well, aren't 3D printed metals not very strong, or how can it actually work? But the printed materials are stronger than they would be built traditionally. Actually, it's counterintuitive. It is, because we develop our own custom alloys in-house. So we have a whole material science team just developing our own alloys for 3D printing. And the fact that it melts and then cools and solidifies very, very quickly, you can take advantage of that physics principle to get really strong alloys.
Another major benefit of 3D printing is that it allows for rapid iteration. You can build a part quickly, test it, and then redesign rapidly and print again.
So this is a version of the engine that's about 3 years old at this point, but what's amazing is when you actually look at the engine design today, it looks entirely different than this. So each version we build, we can iterate and make better. So that's the other, when we say software-driven manufacturing, that's really what it is. Since you don't have fixed tooling, all the part geometries are just controlled via the CAD model, and then the printers just print, direct from file, essentially. It means you can actually change the design extremely fast. So building a whole engine only takes us about a month. So then a month later, you can do a better version, and a month later, a better version than that. So this particular one will actually be, I believe, one of the first flight engines.
Понимаешь, то есть эти русские строители, вот сантехником там работает нормально, говорит, я понял просто, да. Ну вот делают, например, то есть как бы я тебе не верю просто, что в твоей специальности нечем заняться, просто такого не бывает, понимаешь, просто ты, да, понял. Не, я тебе говорю, что я, да, понимаю, да. Ну, что теперь делать, по любви, говорит, да, понимаю. Ну да, первая жена, говорит, от Бога, да, типа того. Наверное, правильно, говорит. Что теперь мне сейчас? Все просто наоборот. Наоборот, да, контринтуитивно жизнь, да. Чем рискуешь? Да, ты понимаешь. Да, рискуешь, да. Понимаешь. Ну да, хорошо. Ладно, заниматься надо. Да, да понимаю. Да, да, да. Ладно, смотри сам. Работать можно, ладно.
It's actually launching to orbit on our first rocket.
So this tubing, not 3D printed, right?
Not today.
Okay.
And the future versions, we're actually, integrating that into the printed housings, and we're going to have a way that that's all printed too.
Perhaps the biggest impact of the 3D printing approach could be to totally transform what a rocket looks like. With 3D printing, engineers can build parts that would be impractical or impossible with traditional techniques. Smooth, curvy, bio-inspired designs are just as easy to print as ordinary structures.
This is actually part of our next rocket, Terran R, so it's even larger.
This is like the base of a tank?
Yeah, so it's going to go out, it's almost done printing, it's going to go out about to here, so it's 16-foot diameter, but it's almost like a shell.
I was gonna say, like, this reminds me of suddenly we're in The Little Mermaid or something.
Yeah, it's just for stiffness though.
It's not that you plan to make it bio-inspired, it's that that structure is actually the optimal structure.
Yeah. We're actually designing many features in the rocket that could not be manufactured unless it was 3D printed, which is one of the secret sauces of why you had to build a whole company around it, is because our rocket actually looks entirely different 3D printed than it does traditionally. Like, in my mind, it's been more akin to like gas internal combustion engine to electric. Really, people are trying to put batteries and electric motors into existing products for decades. Like, everyone knew electric vehicles were the future, but Nissan and Ford had really not compelling products for a long time. It wasn't until a company came along, called Tesla, that decided, well, actually, the shift to electrification means the batteries, the electric motors, the factory, the design of the product, how we're actually going to scale the company, the supply chain, all of it's different because of electrification. I mean, that's in some ways the dirty secret of electric cars and why they're able to be automated in production, because the part count is so much lower. So for a fully 3D printed rocket, we have 100 times fewer parts, which is what we're guiding to. There's no fixed tooling in our factory at all. Unlike the rest of aerospace, that's still really 60 years later, even since Apollo, building products one at a time by hand with hundreds of thousands.
То есть, или ты вручную собираешь весь Советский Союз туда, понимаешь, и рабов еще из Египта. В 10 раз, представляешь? Ну ладно, это не шутка просто. Прикинь, как вот сколько квартира стоит? Я же даже не шутил, оказывается, да. Один нулик убираешь, и получается цена принтованного дома, и качество на голову выше, и ты любой формы можешь его делать, понимаешь? То есть, как бы, думай, вкладывать деньги или не вкладывать в это, меценаты там, гребаные, я понимаю, да. То есть, когда время дело, да, понимает он тебя. Это только вопрос времени. Поэтому бизнес этим и занимается, потому что ширли-мырли это невыгодно, там везде строители все пьяные, всем нужны уже деньги, жрать, срать давай, там у них что-нибудь там еще, да, понимаю, да. Да, то есть и работать никто не собирается, потому что они просто деньги все там получают, да, понимаешь. То есть как глисты просто, как опарыши. Да, куда их научили там в 3 года, они, да, на уровне детского сада так и остаются все там. Да. То есть ты свистнешь, они все, понимают на тебя. Да, а таланты их не идентифицированы, понимаешь? И ты, если говоришь, то есть они такие, мы что-то вообще, это. Я из этой области вот это возьму, я из этого, да, понимают, типа того, да. Кто тебе мешает-то, блин, да. Ну, понимаешь, все свалить на систему образования, это тоже не совсем правильно. Но на этом этапе тоже можно много чего сделать, да. Да. На себя все свали, у тебя одна только судьба, ты же жизнь, да. Видишь сам, что ты такой, блин, нет, да. Ну смотри сам. По-любому, где бы ты ни был, все равно работать надо. Это окажется вдруг противоположно почти тому, что значит деньги зарабатывать, на твоем понимании, да. Вот поэтому понимаешь, да. Это лучше меня, вы все знаете. У вас же деньги есть, у вас намного больше денег, чем у меня. Вот я тебе говорю, да, все, да, вот, да, они добро должны приносить, это массив, да, приносить, да, да, да. И, честно говоря, да, вот я понял, да. Да, да, да. Ну вот видишь, сам говоришь так, да, да. Да, да, да. Жить-то надо, как еще, ну ладно, да. Ну и что? Да. Ну не рискуй, ты же мужик, правильно, знаешь, не рискуй, не рискуй. Ладно, это что? Ну ладно, это тебе говорю, так и надо. Ладно, ладно. Блин, пиво любил просто тебя, да. Видишь, эту всякую чухню, я еще даже где-то, не знаю, понимаю.
Thousands to millions of individual parts, and no one's really changed that paradigm of how an aerospace factory actually fundamentally works. Yeah, this is the new fully 3D printed rocket. So yeah, we'll have dragonfly wing type structures, and we're building it still. But that's the first one, and then that's that one for scale. So yeah, it is definitely bigger. Yeah, so our rocket is named Terran 1 and Terran R, and then our 3D printer is Stargate. So all the things at Relativity are named after StarCraft. So yeah, of course the Stargate printer was what the Protoss used to warp in spaceships, and so that's what's warping in spaceships at Relativity. We have a system in our avionics called a pylon that we have to build a lot of, so we always joke we have to construct additional pylons. Most people don't know how a rocket's built traditionally at all anyway, and I think a lot of people assume it's rockets, so shouldn't it be already very advanced and robots everywhere, and Elon's got SpaceX and Tesla, so doesn't SpaceX just look like Tesla with all these robots and automation? But that's really not true. I mean, aerospace hasn't adopted automation at all.
One of the issues, right, is that you're not making a lot of rockets.
Right.
So there's no incentive to figure out how to tool up a factory to pump out rockets 100 a day or something.
Exactly.
Like you would for cars.
Exactly. You're not making a lot. Even with commercial aircraft, you're not making nearly as many. And there's orders of magnitude more parts and complexity. A commercial aircraft has several million individual parts. So to have robots assemble several million parts when an automobile has tens of thousands is completely different. It's a much harder problem. So that's where 3D printing is automation for aerospace, because you're not assembling all those parts with robots like you would with a car. You're assembling them in the 3D file, and then the printer just prints them assembled.
The plan for Relativity Space, is it low Earth orbit?
Нет, так это
or
и
is it
так,
going
это давно
further?
известно, то есть это, да, это все про это знают, что, да, 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 абсолютно, у тебя про Диму говорил,
So for Terran 1, it's mostly low Earth orbit, the first rocket. Terran R can actually send payload to the moon, to Mars. I mean, it's pretty huge. I founded the company because I really thought that there needed to be dozens to hundreds of companies making Mars happen. We're focused on taking this 3D printing tech and what we call the factory of the future, and one day shrinking it down to something we'll actually launch to Mars and build an industrial base. So that's the long-term vision of the company, is build the industrial base on Mars. In many ways, this factory is just a prototype. It's still far smaller than a traditional factory. It's far lighter, and I think it's inevitable someone has to build this company.
I don't know that in 10, 20 years that you will be 3D printing rockets all the time, because if you are flying lots of rockets, it becomes cheaper to have a dedicated machine for it. I do think that as a company, they are well placed, because even if Terran fails to capitalize on the market, even if nobody wants to use it as a launch vehicle, They are clearly now the world experts on 3D printing rocket hardware because they've done everything, right? They've tried to apply 3D printing to places where a lot of people dismissed it. So I think they're sort of secure as a company. Whether we will see rockets being 3D printed all the time, that's a good question.
There's been a lot of talk recently about billionaires going to space.
Yeah.
Will a 3D printed rocket make it possible and a lot cheaper for me to go to space?
Yes, I mean, certainly what we're doing is lowering the cost. So our rockets are costing about 5 times to, I believe we can get to 10 or even 100 times cheaper with a fully reusable rocket than what we have today. So it can definitely climb down the cost curve. But I also think, going to Mars and the first people that are going, it really is about what is the point of being a human being. Like for me, why go to Mars is if we were having this conversation and 1 million people were living on another planet, I think it would expand the possibilities of human experience and what it means to be a person. Like we'd have YouTube channels on Mars and people sharing what life on Mars is like versus Earth, and there'd be long distance Amelie, like love story. Like I think there's just a lot of richness in what human culture and society can be about. Yes, I think there's criticism about billionaires going to space, and I don't agree with all of the projects need to actually add up to some vision that is meaningful. I think that's really important. But I do think going to Mars is really just about, we've lived for generations on Earth, so what's it all about? Like, why do we want to keep improving and getting better and furthering society on Earth? So for me, it's pretty existential, what it means to be a human being.
Hey, this video is sponsored by Omaze, offering you the chance to win a trip to space. The winner will get 2 seats on one of Virgin Galactic's first commercial space flights, meaning you and a guest will travel 80 kilometers up in the sky. You'll get to see the curve of planet Earth, experience weightlessness, and become one of the few people in the world to have gone to space. And you'll also get to join Sir Richard Branson for a personal VIP tour of Spaceport America. The flight is estimated to take place in early 2022, so enter at omaze.com/veritasium for your chance to win. Now, Omaze partners with charities, in this case Space for Humanity, an organization whose mission is to expand access to space and train global leaders in the eventual goal of creating a sustainable future. So part of your contribution supports this cause. To potentially win a trip to space and support Space for Humanity, a great cause, go to omaze.com/veritasium. I will put that link down in the description. So I want to thank Omaze for sponsoring this video, and I want to thank you for watching.
Выбор. Так, что там все? Open up. Репетитиосы. Окашки. Кстати говоря, да. Это не важно, я тебе говорю, что надо играть, просто серьезно. беременной, значит, быть, наверное, нет? Ты, пожалуйста, ты же нет? Нет, наоборот, что ли, наоборот, потому что... Что, серьезно, да? Понимаю, да. Я про это не знаю, просто даже... Ой, ладно, ладно. Ну, хорошо, Эх, мама, просто вообще... Наоборот, видит, да, вот она говорила плохо, ты говоришь, тебе, да, ну, да, наоборот, наоборот, вот она о себе так думает просто, да, понимает, себе говорил, это наоборот, типа того, да, типа того. Да, наоборот, да, наоборот.